Hello, everybody. Good morning. Good morning to the second day of our symposium, The Practice of Architectural Research. We're going to start today with Paulo Providência's lecture. I'm so honored to have him here. He's definitely an architect, a practicing architect. He has the most beautiful projects in Portugal, but also he's a writer and he's a researcher. So he's connected to the University of Coimbra. And all these things come together in his research on the work of Álvaro Siza. And he will talk to us and give us some insights in his lenses on that work and on the drawings of Siza this morning. So that for us was a perfect day to start two other sessions, which even go deeper into the practice of architectural research, techniques and tools of the researchers in the morning with Helen Thomas, and then in the afternoon we have the lenses of the researcher with Florian, and then we have some kind of a closing discussion together with Professor Hilde Henne and Professor Wolf Huge. So that's a very, very packed day again after a very packed day yesterday. It's such a shame that we can't see each other in between all of these wonderful talks to have some chit-chats. But the good thing is that we can really open up this conference in a very democratic way to everybody. So it's nice to see that also even today there's a lot of people joining us, and even more and more are coming in. So now I introduce to you Paulo Providência. After the lecture, we invited Philip Christou to reflect on his way of working and the work of Siza together with Eireen Schreurs. But again, we all invite you to also pose your questions, your thoughts. You can do that through the chat, and we'll try and pick it up and pass it on. Enjoy today. Paulo?
Hi.
Hi, Paulo. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm so sorry about the really early hour. It's an hour earlier. There, it's actually 8 o'clock in the morning. Yeah?
It's fine. Thank you.
Okay, I will give you the floor. Can you share your screen, please? Or you talk like that a bit first?
Sorry?
You want to talk like that, or you want to share your screen already?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen, right.
Okay.
But maybe you need to allow me.
It's okay. It should be okay now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So, thank you, Caroline, for inviting me, and thank you. I want to thank you and Eireen for the marvelous organization of this very interesting symposium. I'm going to present this lecture on tracing, Álvaro Siza's tracings. The Catalan architect and professor at Barcelona School, Carles Martí, once wrote that formwork is to the arch what theory is to architectural practice, an auxiliary construction that is no longer necessary when the arch is completed. Only the arch has the right to appear as a final form, not the formwork that allowed its construction. According to Martí, the architectural project belongs to a kind of knowledge that appears in the action of designing, a knowledge that is developed in the act of production. This knowledge doesn't result from the application of a previous static knowledge established a priori, but on the contrary, it implies a dialectic process between thinking and doing, and is always kept open. Architectural tracings are a little like the formwork of architectural design. They exist as a supporting element for design decisions. Finally, when the architectural work is finished, the tracings that rule the design are not necessary anymore. However, there is a fallacy in this reasoning. The formwork for construing the arch is something that we previously know. We know precisely the radius of the arch that we want to build, and we know the form of the arch. The form of the arch is something previously established. But thinking about tracings, it's quite the opposite. Through tracings, we discover the form. We discover new relationships between parts and the whole. And we make choices that finally have consequences in the architectural form without knowing precisely all the consequences of a specific choice. The following lines are based on searching for the use of tracings in design process of Álvaro Siza, and through this trying to understand my own education as architect in 1980s and 1990s. The research tools are deeply related to the architectural design practice. For instance, in this case, we could mention the projective geometry of Robin Evans, as they are based on a process of remaking the paths that led to a specific result. And the lenses through which I'm making my observations are those that allow a narrative to be constructed, a story built of minute details, an open story that allows a dialogue with the listeners, a collective sense-making. Architectural layout is understood as the set of lines that configure the rules of a given design drawing or architectural representation. The ambiguity of the Portuguese word refers to the past participle of the verb to trace, or to a noun that refers to geometric qualities of a drawing or representation. Not completely coincident, the meaning of the word tracing in English means a process of drawing and overlapping lines that configure certain information. In that language, the word also has a meaning of trace, mark, follow up, or copy, which is not unreasonable considering the design process is a dynamic event, subject to the pursuit of clues or marks. In the case of the French language, épure is the word that designates what we call tracing, and its meaning translates the purification of drawing in design process, a kind of cleaning up of the design. In past times, when it was still being drawn but with tracing paper or parchment paper, making pencil tracings on paper allowed its progressive correction or transformation by repeating the translucency of a new paper over and over the drawing. The design layers were physically constituted by the overlapping sheets of tracing paper, with upper sheets showing the purified versions of paths buried on the lower levels. But what is the use of talking about drafting, the small part of complex activity of architectural design, and which is not even the most interesting? Why do we take the time to think about an activity that, although it has consequences for architectural design, does not replace the debate on adequacy, criticism of the project, or architectural culture, which are so necessary? Any project exists in a specific place, and this place has an existence previous to the project. It was the object of previous building or planning actions, a place where previous inscriptions occur that report land uses, property, geological constitution, vegetation and crops, and others. The interpretation of a place, an action previous to and simultaneous with the act of performing design, is a condition of architectural design. In the case of interventions in places with a strong historical connotation, and all places can be thought of in this way, interpretation is a requirement, and as understanding the current and the sense of transformation goes through this interpretation. Only the interpretation of the tracings, marks of a place, allows us to understand its history and thus to project while incorporating its memory. But tracing is also the set of rules imposed, such as alignments, frames, proportions, and other geometric rules that condition a project. These outlines configure spaces for negotiation between the collective and the subject, and for this reason, their incorporation in the design process, that is, their incorporation in production of sense and meaning in the architectural project, is fundamental. Tracing as an element of negotiation is also a form of participatory management, conflict management, or recognition of parties. The quality of an architectural project is not in compliance with these designs, but without its existence, we may lose the social connection to which architecture aspires. We could think that interpretation is something carried out before the project through an analysis that precedes it. Now, what Álvaro Siza tells us that whenever we try to carry out a previous analysis, the blockade and the impossibility of proceeding soon followed. Conversely, if at the beginning of design process, even provisionally, there were design hypotheses, analysis and interpretation would start them on their way. Thus, for Siza, the interpretation of a given intervention context is a progressive process governed by choices. And similarly, one can think that design or approach is not a given a priori, but rather is a process built by a set of options that grope towards the implications of each line, each feature. The layout never exists a priori. It is always a procedural construction. However, once defined, we can find the three attributes: inscription of orthographic projection. It contains a sequential procedure, and the steps of this procedure are reproducible, preferably an easy to memorize reproducibility, a mnemonic, and it establishes analogies with the represented object or territory. In order to be able to think about the uses of tracings in design process, and even more than this, to understand how a certain tracing emerges and is consolidated in a project through a set of options, we will use an in-depth case study, University of Porto Faculty of Architecture, a project by Siza designed between 1979 and 1997. However, to understand the use of tracing in this concrete project characterized by a strong landscape presence and by its search in a particularly undefined area from an urban point of view, we need some prior information, or rather, some examples of Álvaro Siza's work that help us to understand his drafting grammars, which refer to the set of procedures that he subsequently explored and refined in his practice. So the first example is the urban expansion plan of Évora, a project by Siza in 1977, a plan that preceded back the Malagueira project. And it's very instructive to the identification of existing routes and their incorporation in the plan. As it is an urban expansion plan, it is supported by the continuity of two pre-existing roads, Avenida Salesianos and Avenida Eireen Oliveira. From there onwards, so this is Salesianos Avenue and this is Eireen Oliveira Avenue. The insertion roads of these roads in the historic center, as you can see here, there is a kind of continuity, and especially intermodal insertion of Avenida Salesianos on Rua Serpa Pinto is the object of a careful drawing by Siza, guaranteeing the desired continuity. On the other hand, Eireen Oliveira Avenue was to link the northern limit of Bairro da Malagueira with Quinta da Malagueira. So this is the street, this is the Quinta da Malagueira. And the municipal pool, which is here in this point. The initial drawings and models of the plan, which quickly became a housing project, because in spite of being initially as an expansion project and became a housing project, showed the continuity of the urban structural routes, as we can see here, with their scale and layout, both in the historic city and its expansion, but also other designs, such as urban boundary wall of Évora, which is here, and the aqueduct of Água da Prata, which is an urban element that articulates the urban periphery with city center. In addition to these elements, which are strongly linked to the topography of the place, of the places they cross, producing small inflections in their layout, as we can see here. The project incorporates the neighborhood of Santa Maria through continuities of its spontaneous streets to the north, the Bairro da Malagueira, and reproducing the scale containing extension and sections of its streets oriented to the south, and allowing the shadows of east and west. Block units with houses joined by an infrastructure column which is this one, cut across them, these spaces. So this is the urban, this is Quinta da Malagueira and the spontaneous neighborhoods. The network of water, electricity, and telephone infrastructures of Avenida da Malagueira crosses the street system, reinforcing spatial hierarchy and designing doors and housing containment. So in this point, there is a kind of doors to the streets, and this is an infrastructure. Finally, the regulation of dwellings and their association, configuring elongated compact blocks with infrastructures and systems. Just a second, these are the main routes. The articulation between the spontaneous neighborhoods and these are the main routes, and the articulation between the spontaneous neighborhoods and the projected ones, giving continuity to the structure. And mainly the blocks. Finally, the regulation of dwellings and their association, configuring elongated and compact blocks with infrastructures in the system, described and structured in two types of patio house in evolutionary schemes from 2 to 5 bedrooms. It produces variations of a plot of 12 by 8 meters. These dimensions allow for internal organization by dividing it into 6 by 8 meters, 12 by 4, and 6 by 4 meters, considering patio and living room, outdoor and indoor space. So this is our two typologies, the interior patio and the exterior patio, okay? And the progressive typologies that are. The Malagueira project, which began in March 1977, took place in the year following Siza's participation in Venice Biennale, precisely under the theme of Center-Periphery Connection, a theme in which Aldo Rossi also participated. The planned collage of Aldo Rossi, with its overlapping of the plots of the historic city, was not analogous to the plan that Álvaro Siza presented on Eireen in Malagueira, where the various forms of housing construction were visible. There were buildings with 5 floors by the National Housing Council, the clandestine buildings neighborhoods, the experiences of projected housing but without the structure of urban sport, and of course his proposal structured on the continuity of the aforementioned roads, on the incorporation of facilities such as Quinta da Malagueira, which is structured right in this point, the mills, the tanks, and the public space. The layout takes on a new meaning. It's no longer the autonomous design of walls, but the articulations of building typologies, the articulation of arranged parts and dispositions, urban layout, just a second. Of construction. A second point, that is the exam. This is same theme as Álvaro's participation in the competition promoted by the IBA in Berlin in the years 1978 to 1983, to think about alternative rehabilitation models for Berlin urban quarter. Concretely, the question that arises in Berlin, where the urban marks of the Second World War were still present, is to complete an urban block next to the Landwehr Canal, which is this one here, where some of the buildings that delimit the block were demolished, as well as much of the interior, especially the Mietkaserna, so the houses for renting. The strategy for the project is well known. Through the design of the elements that produce Berlin's housing typologies, the L-shaped building with axial access, the gable building, the cube building with access from the corner, to build an alternative spatial structure that values the block interior and Elisabethshof. So these are typologies. And this is the 120-meter red brick wall, allowing it to be used collectively. So Siza turns all the volumes to the interior of the quarter, keeping these voids open and allowing to to incorporate the interior of the quarter in the urban space. A regulation based on a 5-meter module allows the construction of an insertion grid for the buildings, reinforcing an autonomous logic linked perpendicularly and with access via the Erkelensdam and Buckler Park. It defines a syncopated rhythm of metrics of 25 or 35 meters, finding a new dialogical order with various metrics present. The lesson of the Frankfurterstraße buildings is also a way of reflecting on the construction of contemporary city and the impossibility of distorting history by filling in the block and erasing the history of the place, or rather the impossibility of committing the marks of destruction and affirming a lost unity. The memory of demolitions inside the block is affirmed by superimposition of the new buildings on the remains of the demolished buildings, as you can see here, for instance, and here. Converting to garden areas, so the memory of the buildings are these garden areas, allowing other uses to be claimed for the interior of the block, subverting the established order. A third example is the school Jean de Deus et Penafiel. The theme of the index of implantation as the historical memory of a place emerged in Jardins College on Deus project in Penafiel in 1984, not long after the Berlin projects. The school lot is adjacent to the new Penafiel Law Courts, which is this building, designed by Joana Godinho and inaugurated in November 11th of 1986, contemporary in its construction and on a very diverse scale. The issue of conflict of scale between both facilities resolved by maintaining the pre-existing topography, as you can see here in this drawing, the topography of the lot intended for the school. Maintaining the hill and the settlement of new building on his great foundation allows the one-story building to compete with the monumental scale of the Law Courts building here. So the drawing presents greater graphic intensity in the representation of the alignments in the volumes of the school, which occupies the center of the intended lot. A first limit arises from the extension to the west of a portico implanted in the court lot. Parallel to this alignment to the north, two other alignments appear, platform and the recessed volume. The main elevation of the school presents the outline of a flap, the height of which aligns with the cornice or eaves of the court. Above that element is volume that accompanies the flap and three accompanying volumes which correspond to the skylights of the central spaces of the school dedicated to the canteen and kitchen. Car access to the interior of both lots is concentrated in the mediation space between them. Although in school lot, the access has a slight twist in relation to the norm for primary alignment, which is this one. So this twist replicated in volume, in the school volume, creating a fracture between the south and north alignment of the building. This other alignment represented in orange refers to and incorporates the direction of a road prior to the new avenue and court of the court, where a volume was located occupied center of the lot dedicated to the court. A 45 degrees diagonal originating from the west-south limit of the lot, in which crosses the second alignment parallel to the avenue, determines the implantation edge of the school volume. It extends through the constructed one, so this is the 45 degrees line, and it extends through the constructed one and meets the southeast and end of a volume that emerges from the garage. So there is this two directions. In his project, he tries to combine the direction of the new avenue with the old structure, just making this twist. These are the rooms for the children, the main canteen and other volumes. This is the main entrance. So The analysis of the physical context of insertion, like the analysis of the existing or pre-existing elements through readings of the mapping, mentally redoing process of visiting and recognizing places associated with the first traces, seeking to identify territorial lines of force in which the topographic features, registration, road or access systems, and retaining or delimitation walls appear as true marks on which to anchor decisions or reinscribe the lines of force of a hypothesis or desire for the project. The project's desire for intelligence, this is quoting Siza, will then consist of the construction of a constellation of signs which, interconnected by lines of outline, will form a sense, a figure, or a possibility of form. So now we are going to see the Faculty of Architecture project. The area of the Faculty of Architecture is part of a particularly significant historical area in the city of Porto, located in the upper part of the city. The platform that accompanies Rua de Campaleg to the west is part of a larger topographic set that begins at the platform of the Torre da Marca, Crystal Palace Garden. Just a second. That is here in this corner, maybe. Oops. Okay. And extends to the west until Lord del Douro Valley. Historically, this area was occupied through the second half of 19th and 20th centuries by a significant number of estates such as Quinta da Maciarinha, Casa Tete, and so on. So these are some kind of former farms that pre-exist in this area of port wine trading merchants. Landscape of the hills is punctuated by driving beacons at the entrance of the mouth of the river, such as Torre da Marca, Chapel of Santa Catarina. The set of houses and estates have privileged the scenic relation with Douro River and the mouth of Douro River, Foz. The construction of the Rábida Bridge in 1957 profoundly changed the Rua de Campaleg with the introduction of the city's rapid highway to the north of the country at the exit of the bridge and the crossing designed towards Rotunda da Boa Vista. So maybe we can see this is the crossing to Rotunda da Boa Vista that is in this point. This is Rotunda. So subsequently, the implementation of the plan for the Campaleg University Pole, that's something that should appear in this area here, whose pedestrian access system was not fully implemented, increased construction in the area where the faculties of humanities, architecture, and sciences are located between Rua de Campaleg and fast access of the road highway. So this is the pole, the new pole of the university where the faculty is located as well. So this area is delimited by Panoramic Road, which is a road that goes across this point here. It goes even to that point, which crosses under the Rábida Bridge. So the Rábida Bridge is here. So it goes, it comes from this point, goes under the bridge and crosses this point. And there are some hills here which are very important, which are a Rábida Hill, which is in this point. Bicalho Hill is this one, Golgotha Hill, and Pena Hill. These are, so there are 4 hills here that make a special topography in the area. So, but what is the place of interpretation in a project that is so complex? What is the contribution of so-called heritage that the so-called heritage can provide in consolidation or construction of the meaning of a fragmented and incomprehensible place, the result of a palimpsest of inscriptions that are partly erased, partly surviving, and in which the nexus of meaning has become difficult to unveil. So, and maybe the response could come with this 19th century plan of the area, which is where we can see the former quintas or farms like this one. So The first element for the installation of the University of Porto faculty in the early 1980s consisted of a lot of walled land at Quinta da Póvoa. So this is Quinta da Póvoa, this is Quinta da Esperança, so two farms. The process began with rehabilitation of the house at Quinta da Póvoa. So this is Quinta da Póvoa, and the process started with the rehabilitation of the house. To install the services necessary for progressive transfer of students from the School of Fine Arts, rehabilitation and expansion projects of the whole horse stables, as well as the house. These are the horse stables. Sought to enhance the surviving elements of the road works to access the recently built Arabia Bridge. Particular attention to the set of elements that make up houses and access revealed in careful rehabilitation extended to arrangement of the gardens. In this process, the need to build a pavilion initially thought of as a temporary construction was to be a determining element in design of complex future expansion. Its placement at north end of the lot, pressed against boundary walls, allows the remaining garden to be freed and the internal area between the house and pavilion to be polarized. The shape adopted, this is the first version, this is the second version of the pavilion. The shape adopted for the interior space, which opens around the patio, is closed to the outside and is seen from the south as two facades punctuated by small openings, causing a strangeness of scale. So this is then there is two small openings. The shape adopted for interior. On the west wall, there is a large gap over the grounds of Quinta da Esperança. So there's a huge opening here in the upper floor. And that time, not yet assigned to the Faculty of Architecture. So when Siza designed this project, the Quinta da Esperança, there was not yet the expansion area here. So it was later decided to have the expansion to that side. The symmetry designed initially in the entrance volumes of north side is broken by the need to preserve the roots of two big trees that interrupted south-north path of the garden. So there were two trees here, and therefore this corner had to be cutted and cantilevered. A drawing carefully indicates a new entrance to the complex in the northeast corner of the lot. So this is cantilevered area, and this is a proposed entrance in this point first and then here. This eccentrically referred to a pedestrian, so this is the supposed pedestrian access to the ensemble. This entry clearly referred to a pedestrian will be related to the intentions of building a system of pedestrian space in the university complex in general plan for third pole, independent of the car access system, and implies a profound remodeling of the recharacterization of road system. The northeast access provided for the project was to be carried out through a mediation space using a small castellated evocation construction, which would constitute the polarization. So this is a proposition for another entrance to the north side of the lot. Access to the north side of Quinta da Póvoa was to take place through the northwest link between the wall terrain and terraces that make up the new building. So this is the tracings, the final tracings. We have this alignment that this road, this pathway existed already previously, and it was reinforced by the construction of the building that in another way makes this facade facing the mouth of the river. We can see here these 2 points, which should be the new entrance and a kind of belvedere over the path of the river. To reinforce the entrance in the main building, the drawing of this path opens, makes a kind of rooms, a special room here, and reinforces the continuity of the garden with polarization of 2 points. Soon after the completion of the Carlos Ramos Pavilion, Siza developed the project for the new Faculty of Architecture on the grounds of Quinta da Esperança. This land is strongly framed by its topographic placement between Morro de Golgota and Morro de Beigel, so the hills of Golgota and Beigel. The terrain is crossed by panoramic route and not by fast accesses to the bridge, as you can see here, both the fast access and the panoramic road. The design drawings follow each other, affirming several references in the groping for solutions. At the first, the concern seems to focus on the construction of a cloistered volume at north. So this is the platforms, the pre-existing platforms of the area of Quinta da Esperança that will be incorporated in the Faculty of Architecture. At first, the concern seems to focus on the construction of a cloistered volume, as you can see here, at northern limit of the land and close to the Quinta da Póvoa lot. A set of volumes appear to the south limit, practically from the first sketches. And the boundary wall of Quinta da Póvoa, so this is the volumes aligned by the house. And the boundary wall of Quinta da Póvoa lot was to appear consistently as a fundamental reference in the construction of the project. So we can think about three moments in the tracings of this project. The volume of Quinta da Póvoa is taken as an element of our volume of the new program. Being a three-story volume with a privileged north-south direction implanted perpendicularly to the bank of the Douro River, it assumes a prominence that has ensured its survival in plans made for the area through the 20th century. One of the solutions to place a cluster volume here refers to Bishop's Palace. Land is freed to the south of to place a set of volumes on the panoramic road. The second solution considers the cluster open to the south, keeping the volumes to the south and aligning the lateral volumes. So, but meanwhile, there is this nice drawing in which we can see the main wall, the extension, so the volumes aligned with the former house, and is trying to make kind of volume or barrier for facing the highway. And in this corner, you can see a drawing, so some other references like this one. It's the kind project for the mother's house, the Dominican sisters. So meanwhile, there was this idea maybe of working with volumes and inscribing volumes in the structure, in the larger structure. So a second solution considers the cluster open to the south, like this here. Keeping volumes to a third considers a greater stretch to the west. So this is second solution, or second, yes, it's development of that first idea of a cluster, but he opens the cluster through his volumes. And we can see still here the traces of the former platforms, as you see here. So there were these platforms, there were some kind of walls there. So these were the signs from which he was trying to, and this is a third initial solution in which the volumes were making steps in order to get to this point here. And we can see also here the trees that should, in a way, protect the area from the highway at this point. So, of course, there is always this idea of platforms, how to connect the entrance of the Ramos Pavilion with the scales of and the space of the building. This is the highway here and the facade. So in subsequent drawings, the direction of this volume becomes perpendicular to the west boundary wall of Quinta da Póvoa. Note that path that accompanies the wall is maintained in all drawings. So in this point, there is this huge direction that brings perpendicular to the wall of the lot. So there is two directions now, the perpendicular of the wall and the continuity with the former house. The replication of volume and the alignment of new volumes, and of course these two directions, they meet in a specific point that should be in a way a kind of door or entrance in the ensemble. So the replication of volume and the alignment of new volumes on south facade will conflict with layout of Via Panoramica, given the constriction it caused at Quinta da Expressa. A new layout of a panoramic road. So the panoramic road this tracing was changed in order to incorporate this. A new layout of panoramic road negotiated with the author of general plan for the third pole of university would allow the expansion of platform necessary for implementation of volume of the new faculty. These volumes were to vary in proportion through the development phases of base program preliminary study and base project. Proportion would be closer to the proportions of the house of Quinta da Póvoa, which measure 20.30 meters by 12.14, stabilizing 4 volumes which measure 18.14 by 11 meters. The proportion common to both types of buildings has a ratio of 1.672. In final version, the passage of volumes of square to rectangular proportions, so this one was still in the square proportion and then they become rectangular, would lead to correction of the alignments of its southern facade by the wall of Quinta da Póvoa, not by the housing building. So later he had to realign, to make new proportions of these buildings align through this wall instead of that one. So here you can see the overlapping of the former panoramic road and new road, and in the perpendicular line through that wall and this line that converts in the point here. In a third moment, but however, how to connect both directions in this point was not yet clear in these drawings. As you can see, there are still lots of hesitations of how to do it. In the third moment, formulation of the need for a second direction volumes to the north implied design of a patella, particulating the two directions, so this point here, which caused the deviation in volume of the library here, that allows the reading of the west facade of Carlos Ramos Pavilion. So in a way, it was intended to open the Carlos Ramos Pavilion facade here to this access, and so there was, in this first drawing, the alignment of the library is here. It's a direction we don't know very precisely. We know this direction is perpendicular to this wall. There will be in a second version the direction of this wall that exists already because this building was already built, and then there was a mirroring of this angle to this point to mark the beginning of the library. Thus, geometry of the layout of the faculty in its various design. So this is a second version in which the volumes are still square, and then this is the point where the new direction is made. As you see, there is a mirroring this angle to this point in order to have this direction, and then construct the geometry of this patella or articulation. Thus, the geometry of the layout of the facades of the faculty and its various design versions always seems to start from two elements that constitute the polarities of the Quinta da Póvoa. The Carlos Ramos Pavilion through its southwest corner and the alignment of the south facade of the house of the Quinta. This polarization of two paths meets at the west limit of the set when the two are close to the viaduct of the expressway. The space defined by them, roughly a triangle, is projected to the east boundary wall, to the boundary of the enclosure. The square that is configured such that it redeems the interior space that created by these two sets of volumes. Redeems the absence of qualified public space in the urban plan, and appears as a comment to the Met buildings plans for the area provided for in large-scale planning. Volumetrically, the strategy follows that defined in Jardim Escolas João de Deus, in search for alignments of the Western Tower with the farmhouse. In the final version, proposed volumes send out from the alignment of the house, starting to align with the south wall of Quinta de Conce's power platform. This changing line moving to the west of the intersection of two alignments in the panoramic path. In the final drawings, in the final drawings of the first design brief, produced in January 1987, the program is distributed among the buildings close to us to be the final version. After a set of drawings that test a central space defined between autonomous volumes to the south and a set more coordinated to the north, there is the formation of three fundamental strokes in the composition: the alignment of volumes to the south by the volume of Quinta da Póvoa, the alignment of originating the southeast corner of Carlos Ramos Pavilion, which extends perpendicular to the wall contained of Quinta da Póvoa, and which affirms the alignment in the volumes that delimit the set of to the north, and the outline of the articulation hinge between that direction and direction of the library volume, delimiting central space of the north. The need to mark the entrance to the building would lead to construction of a folly close to the panoramic road viaduct. So here we can see the intersection with the closed viaduct. Respecting the pedestrian access layout of general plan for the third pole, never implemented. This fully inserted in system of pedestrian spaces replicates northeast entrance of Quinta da Póvoa that was not executed in previously mentioned, showing similarities with the Quinta da Conceição reception yard, a project by Fernando Tábora. As in a space that is too fluid and formless, there is a need to cause necessary restraints to sign an entrance. In this third volume, the platforms of central space are consolidated, incorporating paths that and defining support walls, and the volumes on the south side acquire their current proportion, including the alignment. So this is the correct nowadays current proportion, including the alignment of the volume of the east. The set of platforms that give access to Quinta da Póvoa, starting from the source that is from the new entrance into the set, were incorporated in the project. Central platform is particularly central platform in particular is placed as an altimetric cut in relation to the sidewalk, which makes it's visible along its entire length. The paved platform constitutes a civic square in an area where the urban space is strongly conditioned and uncharacterized. The central platform, which is access to secretariat and auditoriums, is linked to the other terraces, gradually overcoming the gap in access to Quinta da Póvoa, consolidating the existing terraces into solid stone walls. The progression of ramps and access culminates in a small platform at northeast limit of Old Quinta da Esperança, and from there access can be made to the interior of Hortus Conclusus, I mean the lot of the first Quinta da Póvoa. The insertion of this coordinating platform pre-existing and incorporating into the design process in the general design of project makes use of the layout of the library body designed by the alignment with southeast corner of Carlos Ramos Pavilion. So the architectural traces appear in Álvaro Siza's project as a conclusion. The architectural traces appear in Álvaro Siza's project as a particular moment of linking architectural and urban form to the social, cultural, physical context. As a territorial inscription, the layout emerges as one, incorporation of paths of the inhabitants of the urban space. 2, a technique for rescuing the past by affirming settlement archaeologies, readings of territorial palimpsest. 3, recording of tensions and negotiations of the project with territorial management institutions or promoters, the planned project conflict. 4, a mnemonic to local architectural references. And 5, an element of landscape linkage to the memory of physical places, orography, topography, others. In design process, outlines are a form of self-knowledge, a dialogue with oneself, an affirmation that is privately tested before being publicly declared. In the design studio, the most obvious way to test layout is to transmit it to the collaborators who will follow it as a design rule in the production of drawings and models, or a geometric norm that surpasses and directs the myriad of options and decisions. To the specialist engineer who needs it to calculate his infrastructure, to the foreman who cannot do without it, through a set of lines to replicate design alignments, to the performer of worker who sees in it the geometric rule that he needs to perform his task. Traces are elements of mediation between the project and work, but they are also elements of mediation between the various actors in the process of planning, design, and execution. And this mediation implies the sharing of codes of spatial representation, codes of geometric construction, a set of design instruments only accessible within the design process. Álvaro Siza tells us that each project unit, due its verified multiplication, constitutes a mediation between general and individual interests. It requires a global idea and detailed approach simultaneously, real or simulated. It requires a relationship between plan and project, each containing the other, without the other limiting or dispersing or hierarchizing, reducing in one way or another. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Paulo. I still had one final element, which is in fact a kind of synthetic design drawing that makes this kind of huge connection between all those traces. So that's it. Sorry, I spent 4 minutes more than it was supposed to.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you very much, Paulo. Can I also have Philip entering the discussion?
Yes, hello. Hi, thank you very much, Paulo. That was wonderful.
Hi, Philip. We'll get you on spot. Yes. Thank you, Paulo. We have a bit of time to discuss your wonderful lecture with an amazing 163 slides, which I feel is no, but it's really wonderful because it very much shows the architect looking for traces, tracing himself, and then you as a researcher tracing on top of these tracings. So I think again already in the slides you see this building up of different narratives. Philip, would you like to start a discussion? We discuss maybe.
Yes, and if there's anyone who has a question, why don't you put it into the chat, and we will also let the people speak. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that was wonderful. What I really appreciate about your lecture, Paulo, is that we see the process of thinking and doing through the tracings, you know, in Siza's work, and how much we can see of the unsure quality of the beginning. Like, for example, this very, very dumb kind of courtyard building in the School of Architecture as a beginning, just to have something on paper, you know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and then the process of what you call these moments of in the tracings, and so in my mind that's design research, you know. That's and Siza is a exemplary figure in able to be doing design research. So I would like to discuss, if we can, more and more about this idea about tracing, or, you know, and even tracing paper, but anyway, tracing, yeah. When I was thinking about asking you a question, I was reminded of a very nice essay that Wilfred Wang wrote in a book about Siza's work called From Line to Figure, that he wrote together with Rudolf Finsterwalder, and in 2011, and part of an exhibition. Wilfred wrote a piece called From Line to Space. And I'll quote from his essay. He says, "How something may turn from a line of thought to a narrative thread, to a geometric line, to a spatial enclosure, and to a reconnection with a common ground on which we might all stand." Well, that's a fantastic transformation, isn't it? From something very abstract, like a line of thought, a very abstract thing, to something that we can all share in a kind of common cultural context, And he goes on, "From thought to space and form, that is the daily metamorphosis waiting to be grasped, captured before the thought has a chance to," quotes, "escape from its materialization." Because he had quoted at the beginning of the lecture, Siza saying, "I scarcely know which materials to choose. Ideas come to me immaterially, lines on white paper. When I want to fix them, I have doubts and they escape, waiting in the distance." So this is this point where this process of tracing is a very delicate and unstable process, or what you called a dialectic process between thinking and doing, or it's a dynamic event, It's
absolutely.
So with all those kind of thoughts, I just want to maybe ask you for all of us who are trying to do design, and or students or architects that are working in the processes such like this, is this an unusual type of examples, Siza's work, which is specific to him and his artistry, or is it something that we can all do in some way? This kind of tracing. Yeah.
Okay, I think first of all, I think that many years ago, Siza used to say that he used when starting a project, he was having always a problem. It was the blank sheet, how to begin something, how to start, how to make the first line. So it was a drama in a way, because he arrived to the project without any architectural program, I would say, previously. So I think that he started to create a strategy of starting the project, just reading marks, just trying to, to take the existing marks as a starter, something that would allow to respond in a way. So seeing a place, a wall. I remember the first conference I saw from Siza in 1982, maybe. He was not very fluid in communication in that time. So in describing projects, he started just saying, I went to this place, there was a tree, there was a wall. So it was, and for the audience, suddenly that tree was becoming a phenomenon, that tree was becoming something really big, because he was just, explaining the site. So I think that in the beginning, all these things, these tracing strategies started with this idea how to start a project, and starting to take some lines of a plan, and then or some marks in a place, and starting to think about what to do with that thing. How could this thing be a starter or a trigger, something that makes an impulse? So in fact, this lecture was very much I intended in two senses. One is it has a kind of didactic purpose, just to make students see that a project is a process. It's not just the, so it's something that you have to.
It doesn't come out from fully formed, like a.
Yeah, it's a resume. It's lots of things that come together, and you have to deal with it, with this complexity of things. And you have to, in each moment, you have to clarify what's the path you want to follow. And
adjust and change the direction.
And so it's complex. And and so this is one point I wanted to show students. It's the final result we see was not something that appears suddenly. It was a process with a lot of work, hesitations, decisions, and so on. And so this is one point I wanted to show. Another point has to do with the notion of context. That, of course, I don't think that Siza's architecture is contextual in the sense that responds in a conservative way to the context. If you see 19th century houses, you have to make a 19th century house, or if you so it's not contextual in this sense. But it has deeply related with context, in the sense that it makes a kind of dialogue with context, and it changes the context. I think that the purpose of Siza in relation to the context is to change the context. It's to work with context, and not just preserving the context. Of course, for working and changing, you need to know very accurately what is there. So what are things that appear there? So we have to deal with the existing things. I don't know if these existing things are the real or the reality that we spoke yesterday, but maybe they have some kind of connection with that reality. But your quoting from Wang is really wonderful, because it's precisely something that comes from a very abstract perception, this line of thought, until the ground, so the concrete thing. One thing that yesterday arrived was this idea by Wang that finally what counts is it's the built work, which of course I agree in a sense, but the fact is also that there are so many constraints that change, that make an interference in the final building, that for instance, this Faculty of Architecture building, the first impression that it was, the building was made in two phases. One phase was, the faculty building was in two phases. One phase was the rough work of concrete, and then was the finishings. And there was a third phase, which was the exterior spaces, the walls and the platforms and so on, the gardening. And after the first phase, when everything was built in concrete, because it was not a structure of pilar beam, it was just,
concrete walls.
Walls made of concrete.
Yeah.
when this building was finished just in concrete, it was really impressive. You know, it was.
Yeah, I've seen photographs of that.
It's a building in transformation.
Yeah,
I think
in a way,
Paulo,
it was much nicer than after this finishing of plaster, white plaster, you know. And in fact, Siza wanted to make, I suppose he wanted to make a cladding of stone over the old building. There was not money enough for doing it. So finally, I think there was this kind of problem. So he had to just to make this plastered finishing and this kind of basement made of stone. So, you know, this was this decision that implied money has huge consequences on the final perceptions you have about the building.
So you can actually say that the building is also a sort of negotiation reality.
Right. Yeah,
and
right.
with the constraints.
Right.
I see that in the chat, Wilfried is by chat joining the conversation, and since we're talking about the reality of building, and we started this discussion, maybe Wilfried, would you like to join the discussion since you've been quoted already?
Well, I've just
2 times.
Thank you very much, Philip. Very kind of you, and your reading of the text sounds wonderful. So,
it is.
I wanted to just add to Paulo's presentation, which I enjoyed very much, and I enjoyed seeing all both the original drawings and your analytical traces on top. Just wanted to add the comment that the closed U-shaped pavilion for the Kalashwarmish is kind of a continuation of so many other projects by Siza, beginning with his brother's house.
Yeah, right.
And is a kind of a rereading of or retracing of Aalto's ideas of U-shaped courtyards, you know, Villa Mairea and so on. But he also, by the Kalashwarmish pavilion, creates a wide open U-shape with the Dean's building and the old shed, and then the Kalashwarmish. And then when he adds the new faculty, it becomes another one, right? So
right.
It's a recursive thing, which
right.
Aalto has done as well, and it's so brilliant because it's the idea that you have this idea of a communal space, but it's not closed. It's not a 19th or a kind of a pre-modern idea of a monastery onto itself, introverted, but it's one that is protected, but also views out, and it views out to the Douro Valley, right?
Yes.
And so the other side of the faculty is porous. The north side is protected. So many nuances which are just brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah. For example, the missing pavilion on the south side, and the gap to the wall, he leaves always on all those drawings. He leaves a big gap. He doesn't put kind of continuous array of pavilions with the house, and that is clearly in the line of what you're talking, isn't it? From the very beginning. Okay. There was one sketch where there was a pavilion further south in that gap. He tries, Did you when he moved the road, in your sequence, Paulo? But it was like an attempt. Could we put a small pavilion? I think it was a low one,
I think it's quite nice, this idea that actually what you're saying, Paulo, that the reality of building. I have the feeling after this presentation that the project of Siza is many buildings, because it sometimes includes other versions, earlier versions. So this idea of growing is actually very influential in the actual building. So it grows from the site, but it also grows from itself, and it grows so it's continuity in many levels. But still, of course, he appropriates it and he transforms it. Yes. So there is and I have the feeling that these 3 points, so the tracing, so in your research, you order your material so that you can see these moments where they actually maybe also sometimes deviates from everything that's collected, because it's a continuous
Yes, it's
ordering process.
Yeah, I must say it was a selection. There were 900 drawings.
Oh, good.
So
Yes.
this 160 slides is a very short part.
Yes. And I have a question from Tom Mays, maybe dealing with this idea of ordering or differentiating. He asked, like, what is the difference between a trace and a sketch? Because it seems like a very clear distinction after your presentation, Louis asks. Could you maybe say something also about how you then put another layer?
As you know, in the beginning of this lecture, I was just commenting about words, because I'm not completely sure about if tracing is the right word. I don't have another, and I don't know English enough for being more precise. But difference for me, at least, between trace and sketch is sketch. I imagine in general as a hand drawing, something you do, and as a trace, something that you can communicate through geometric instructions, and these geometric instructions can be read by everybody, by a contractor or so it's a kind of instruction in a way. It's much more an instruction, a trace, than
Yes.
a sketch is it's, for me at least, something that illustrates something, and the trace it's a mark, is something very. So it's a kind of objectivity, and what is curious, I think, is that as things are so fluid in his design process for Siza, I think he really needs these traces in order to stabilize, to bring in a moment order to drawing. Otherwise, everything keeps fluid and it's difficult to deal with. And maybe also because these traces became more important in times where he had to be out of the office for some reasons, and he had to have no rules for drawing for his for the architects that were working in his office. So maybe he has these two senses. I don't know.
I think also that Paulo, the word tracing is a pretty good one. I mean, I know that there's limitations, but because it's, either whether you're tracing with tracing paper over a measured plan, or like a survey plan that's from a historical map or something, or whether you're tracing over an assistant has made a kind of measured programmatic plan, and you have to somehow trace over it's I think you included this idea of time in your title.
Right,
yeah?
Right, absolutely.
And so there's, in the act of tracing over, for example, traces that are in the site, like say a certain angle that when you enter the Faculty of Architecture and you're looking up towards the kind of hill where the Carlos Ramos Pavilion is, there's a certain angle that you're tracing that line of sight,
Right.
When you're making that plan, and inevitably, it's a kind there's a time element there, like there's traces of the past and maybe even the future somehow in that line, so that the word trace is also like, we find traces in the ground, or we find traces of past things, and so I think the word is quite good in that way.
Okay.
There is a question from Laura Harty. Laura, do you want to, or Eireen, can you unmute Laura and maybe she can ask it herself?
Yeah, I have to look at.
Is that possible? Or can you find...
I'm here now. Hi.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, Paulo. I really enjoyed your talk, and I think it's going to link very nicely to what I'll do later on in the day. But the question I had...
Your face, please.
Oh, sorry.
Maybe you're in your pajamas and you don't want to.
No, I'm not. Hi.
Artie, yeah.
Hi, I'm here.
Yeah.
So the question I had really was that some of the drawings you showed were pieces of tracing paper and were definitely traced. Others were drawings on top of printed documents. And I guess what my question is how do you think the printing of the translucent sheet, so the translucent sheet as the kind of the final drawing or as a drawing that can then be printed, what do you think the role of that between the print of the translucent drawing and the trace might be, and how do you think that these prints on which the tracings are fixed change the ground of the context for Siza in particular? So the tracing becomes fixed at a certain point when it's printed, and then is drawn over, and those lines, those moments which you talk about as pivotal, become somehow solidified. And yeah, I'm really interested in this role of the trace as also a fixed entity when it becomes printed.
Okay, so first of all, in 1980s, 90s, and so on, people didn't use computers, so you started a project just putting this translucent paper over your desk and you started drawing. But this paper could stand in your desk for maybe 15 days, the same drawing. So you could have, this drawing, for instance, I'm showing about the crash of Penafiel is probably a 1 week or 2 weeks drawing made by Siza himself before passing this drawing to their collaborators or assistants. So he always started the project doing the first drawing, and why is this? And so the drawing has all these small sketches and these things. So he has both dimensions. He even has a detail for doing a way of connecting the wall with the roof, and also other sketches about the spaces. And mainly the traces. I mean, he was trying to construct the structure of the project. But in other phases after this, when the project, imagine 2 months later, when there was someone already detailing, for instance, detailing at 1:20 scale, of course it was not anymore he himself. He just had collaborators that were doing these drawings, and sometimes these drawings were printed, and he always comes over these printed drawings and remakes or makes corrections, or in fact Siza used to even make corrections during the work. I remember on site in Schreurs, they went with him to see the works. They were building the building. And he said, you see this pillar here, I'm going to cut this pillar. So
that's a pretty drastic tracing, yes. Listen, I
think that this pillar here is not necessary, it is completely wrong. So I'm going to cut this pillar. It was this kind of thing. So everything is moving in a way.
I mean,
so,
there's one more question by Donald
Laura. Okay.
That I think is really, really interesting.
Thank you.
Sorry?
Can we get the last one in? Paulo, I don't know if you can see the questions in the chat. Donald Hickey is actually wanted to talk a little bit about your techniques and tools. And this for me links it really back to the conference here. We're talking about Siza's tracings, but what about your tracings?
Okay.
So firstly, he says, are you hearing me twice now, or only just me? Is it okay? Okay. So first, of course, he's pointing at the importance of the archival material. You're saying hundreds of drawings, so you have that as a foundation for your research. and Phil already pointed this out, like this is real design research. But then there's a second part, and which is these drawings. So it's he talks about the word speculative drawing, and you say this is definitely what Siza is doing. But what about the status of your drawings and your tracings? Because you're talking about objectivity. But when I look at your drawings, they're actually quite precise. And I think there's one element that you leave out of the equation here, and that's the fact that you worked for Siza for a really long time. You have been there, you have been a witness at the drawing table, but also on the site itself. So how does that come into the equation? Huh? I compared, like, for example, when I researched Thomas van der Laan and I'm retracing his work, I have never been at his drawing table, and I've never been a first witness. So what I did is I talked to many of the first witnesses and I let them draw until I'm sure that I'm not speculating, but that I'm as objective as ever can be. But you're a first witness. So where's the speculation in your tracings and where's the objectivity?
Oh, okay, so I never worked for Siza. I never been in, I was... Sorry,
got that wrong.
But no, but I know well Siza, and he, so, and we have, I could say, a friendship relationship. So, but in fact, I never worked for him. But anyway, I visit lots of works with him, his work, okay, so so there are two questions you are asking about my own tracings and about not being speculative. Okay, so we, of course, this is this lecture, these materials I'm showing, it's a reading of his work. Of course, there are lots of there are some drawings I know, supposedly they were, there is no drawings assigned by Siza except one design and drawing, that is this drawing of the crash of a school of Prefiel, because I know this because he signed and he gave me this drawing. So I have this drawing and he signed it and he made me, so he gave me this drawing, so he signed it. So it's his drawing. This one, I'm absolutely sure that he's made his by on his hand. But the other drawings, of course, we can, knowing a bit well his office, we can even know who did specific drawings. For instance, the last drawing I showed, this one with lots of lines, a kind of map, it's made by an Italian girl that used to work in his office and still works in his office for a long time. And she was, and I know that she did this drawing. So we can see who did the drawings. We can know who did drawings. But concerning my own tracings, I have a design process very chaotic, I would say. It's because I always have until I get confident in a drawing, in a plan or a section, until I get satisfied with that drawing, it's a very painful process, I would say. So I always go back in order to turn it more clear. But it's difficult for me to explain what is a clear design, what is a well-composed design. But so I have always this, I have intentions, I start putting in paper my intentions, but since the start until the final result, there is lots of working and reworking until things settle in a way, until things stay calm. So many times when I work with, I have some collaborators with whom I work for some time already, and of course, the main problem of a small office, like my office, is that when you have someone with whom you work already for 3 or 4 years, then the collaborator goes away. So you have to start again a process of teaching, learning, and so on. So, but in fact, I have some sketches and some drawings produced during the design process, but I never collected them in a proper way. So it's difficult for me, for instance, when a specific project I have to show, I may have some photographs of a model, or I may have a sketch or something, but in general, I've never made all these things collected in a proper way in order to express the design, to illustrate the design process. In fact, I was educated in a way that the design process is something really important, but in my time at the school, we never invested a lot in preparing and arranging things, or in preparing things to be read by others as a design process that now I try to do this with my students, but it's difficult because everyone wants to arrive to the final result, and they don't give space for the reasoning and the thinking and the materials produced during the design process.
No, but I also mean, how does your lens, your signature way of drawing, how does it feed into your own analytical drawings, your own design research on Siza? Not only in your own design process, but you definitely have this way of looking and drawing when you're retracing his work. It's completely different than, for example, what Wilfried Wang showed us yesterday with the spiral drawings on top of the Eileen Gray house. So
right. Because precisely what I wanted to show was not the result, but the process. I mean, I wanted to show the reasoning behind the result, and the hesitations are the reasons for the tracings, because we all know the final result, the final tracings, but we don't know how were they achieved. And I wanted precisely to explore something that architects, by practicing, know, that something to arrive to a result is a process. And if you go back, even if the design is most complex, you can just, clean things in order to make all the reasoning, all the steps that, in a way, you followed to arrive to that result. And I think that in Siza's, of course, Siza, as any artist, doesn't want that you look back in the the backside of the show. That's normal. That's absolutely normal, because he knows, and everybody knows, that it, in a way, it's nice to know how things are staged in a way, but on another side, it doesn't mean that if you follow that all the things that are behind, that you'll get a good result. It's not definitively like this, but so there is always this thing about hiding and showing the tracings behind the result. So